Okay, the other day we talked some about the personal information of FDR's life, and we talked about Eleanor Roosevelt. Now we're going to start um, in the events. But instead of just saying events, what we're really mainly dealing with right here at the beginning is the Depression. Okay, so he comes into office after the United States has been in the Depression for about 3 years. So he comes into office and that's his immediate problem that he has to deal with. And his program for that is called the New Deal. Okay, the New Deal. And this is interesting because Teddy Roosevelt's plan for office was called the Square Deal. And I think he's kind of working a little bit off of that because they're both Roosevelts. And if you look here at his campaign poster, I think this is interesting. It says, "The man with a heart, vote straight Democratic, all Roosevelt candidates, the party with a soul." Why are they saying that? Why are they saying that? Who have we just had? Hoover. What do they think about Hoover? They think that Hoover has sat in the office and has not cared about what's gone on in the United States, has not cared about the people that don't have enough money, that don't have jobs. So here is someone with a heart. Here is someone that cares. This party has soul. They're not just going to sit back and let you starve. Okay, so let's vote for Roosevelt, who's going to come in and do something. And a lot of people say too that since having polio, this really changed him, and it changed him as a person. Before he was wealthy, he had everything. He didn't really have a lot of sympathy towards people. But once he developed polio, it really changed the way he felt towards people who had need and any kind of need, because he could see how hard it was to struggle with something. His was a physical problem, but whenever you have a problem, you can relate to anybody with a problem. And they say that going through that experience really changed him and helped him to be able to deal with the country's needs more. Um, One thing I've heard too is that it took a broken man to fix a broken country. Okay, so broken in the sense that he had problems, and his physically his body wasn't well, and so but he was able to fix in some ways, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, um, America. So he comes in with his New Deal. And what is the New Deal and what does it look like? Okay, so he comes in and it's action, action, action. I heard a quote today that a comedian said that it really didn't matter what he did. If he burned down the White House, they would say, well, at least he was able to get a fire started. They're just wanting something to happen. The people have felt like they have had a president who has not done anything, and things have gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So they're looking to the president. This is kind of a different role. They're looking to the president and saying, we need your help. We need you to help us. Okay? So remember the different roles we talked about with the government. The way FDR responds during the Depression changes how we look at the government. People now do look to the president and look to Congress and say, I'm in trouble. How are you helping me? Help me, help me, help me. And that all started with FDR, because he comes in and he does start rolling out one program after another, after another, after another, after another, to try to bring some help and some relief to the people that are waiting in bread lines, soup lines. There's millions of people unemployed. You have all of the people from the Dust Bowl leaving and moving to California and not finding jobs and being treated poorly there. The country's just in a mess. It really is. So he comes in, and your first 100 days as a president is really important, especially if you're coming in a crisis time. Everyone is looking to, what are you going to do? I remember when President Trump became president, everyone was looking to see what he did in his first 100 days. Okay, this was your 100 days. What'd you do with it? And so in FDR's first 100 days, he comes in, He starts New Deal programs to start relieving public suffering. Okay, so what does that look like? I'm going to explain that in just a minute, okay? The first thing he did was he dealt with the banking crisis immediately. He closed all the banks and had people go in and examine whether the bank was healthy or not. Does this bank have money? Is it able to function? Then he gets on the radio and talks to the whole country and explains how banks work and what his plan is in shutting down the banks. Okay, so we are shutting down these banks. This is what we're planning on doing, and then they're going to open up, and we need you to put your money in them and he explains how money works in a country. And by getting on and explaining it to them, then when the banks open up, guess what? There's lines at these banks, and people are not taking their money out. What are they doing? Putting their money in, and that's what we need. We need money circulated in our country. Okay? So people start putting their trust back in the banks. So that was a smart move. He comes in, he closes them, examines them, opens up the good ones. Some of them don't open up, but a lot of them do. Opens up the ones that are stable and then says, go for it. These banks are good, and they were supported by the federal government and given some money so that they could support what was coming. And then the people then came and put their money in the banks. That was the first thing. Okay, now all these programs. I'm going to give you just a few. There's a ton. There's probably hundreds. And they were called FDR's alphabet soup because almost all of these programs went by initials. Okay, so it was, and I'll show you on the next slide, but they went by the letters of the name of the act or the administration or whatever was being passed. Okay, and they were programs that were started, some of them increased the taxes for the rich. So the very, very rich people, the people still making millions of dollars, their taxes went up. Why? To put money back into the government. You have the money, give it to us. Okay? Wow, is that a little scary? That's a little scary. Now, as someone who doesn't make a lot of money, I'm like, woohoo, yay, tax the rich. But think about it. How did those rich people get that money? They earned it. They worked for it. Think about our Barnett buck system. Let's take those of you that have a lot of money. I'm going to require more of a tax from you. You're going to have to pay me more than the one who doesn't have a lot of money and can't make. But you've worked hard. You've done extra work. You've paid off your desk. You read every night so that you can get money. Do you think that's fair that your money would go towards someone who's not working? So in a way, that's what that does. So the taxes increase for the very rich. Then he started having some relief for the poor. When I say relief, I mean direct money given through certain programs. And then trying to create jobs for the unemployed, which is one of the biggest problems. Okay, so you have all these people that don't have jobs, but what do? You can't have jobs because the people who usually hire people don't have any money either. So how do you create jobs? So the government is going to start creating programs that create jobs. That's great. It gives people a way to work. But who's paying for it? The government. Where do they get that money? From you, or by just creating money, and then we have national debt. So I want you to think about, as I talk about these programs, all of the money that would be required to support those programs. Okay, and this is very applicable now because we still talk about this. When you are old enough to vote for a president, you need to be able to be smart enough to listen to what they're saying and say, is this smart for my country? Just because I don't make a lot of money and I want the government to pay me money, does that mean that it should? Is that the way that it's going to work? Because where's it going to come from? Your taxes. Okay, so let's see some of these programs. See, this is what I'm talking about, alphabet soup. CCC, NRA, SSA, AAA, TVA, and that's only a handful, okay? So this first one I really like a lot, and my granddad was actually in this group. This is called the CCC, the Civil Conservation Corps. And what it was a program that gave jobs to men that were 18 to 25 years old, and they sent them all over the country. They planted trees, they built parks, they built dams. Um, Watauga Park in West Virginia in Pocahontas County was built by the CCC. Some of those old cabins were the same ones that the CCC built when they were there. And so we have a lot of some of our national parks we have to thank the CCC for, because they were the ones that dug it out, that created the roads, that built the cabins. And then while they were building it, they lived there. That's where they lived. They lived in these big camps together. And their food was provided, and they got paid a certain amount every week. A certain percentage of that was sent home, and then they were able to keep some of that money to use wherever they were working. So this was a program that was only for a certain amount of time, and then it ended, okay, after a few years. So yes, it put them to work. It gave them something to do. It wasn't just a handout, which is good, but all of the thousands of people that worked at the CCC, but that was direct government money that was coming from the government that was paying them, not private citizens. So you see, if someone makes a business, okay, let's say I open a restaurant and I hire cooks and I hire servers and I hire people to come in and clean. And I hire people to advertise for my business, and I hire someone to do my taxes. Who's paying for all of those workers? The person who owns the business, right? The government isn't. The person who owns the business. So that's how our economy works. And then the government, reduces taxes for business owners and helps them so that they're able to make their business happen, so that then the economy goes well. Do you see? Another one was called the NRA, the National Recovery Administration. And this one changed a lot of business codes within how business worked to increase the wages for the people working. The SSA was the Social Security Act. This is when it started. We still have Social Security. So when you get a certain age, you can apply for Social Security, because you have had, every time I get paid, a little bit of my paycheck gets taken out because of this. Okay, so what did I say? How do we pay for these programs? From your money. So that's how they're paid for. So every time I get paid, a little bit of my money gets taken out to put into Social Security. And then when I'm old enough, then I can claim a certain amount of that, depending on how much I earned during my lifetime. Okay, so it gives payments to the old. It also helped the unemployed, which there was millions then, the sick, and the disabled if you were unable to work. And it still does that today. Okay, the AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Act. So we had all of those problems with the farmers. They had the Dust Bowl. One thing they did was they started trying to educate farmers. They went out and they had some experts that said, look, we just like this reminds me of George Washington Carver, because remember when he went down to Alabama and he said, look, you have been planting cotton and it's destroyed your soil. Okay, well, that's what they did. When people started going out west, they started planting and plowing, and they just destroyed the land, left nothing in it, left no grasses, left no trees to kind of hold that soil in. So then when they didn't get any rain and here comes a drought, then all of that just starts creating these big dust storms. They can't plant anything, and they have drought for years. So they say, look, we need to start planting trees. We need to start planting in a certain pattern to help runoff, so that the dust doesn't accumulate. So there's all kinds of different things that they started doing to help them learn how to plant in a smart way, and how to give the soil back what it needed, so that it wasn't completely destroyed. But one thing it also did, okay, so we have lots of farmers, and so they have had beef and they have had all these vegetables. We paid some farmers to destroy the food they had already harvested. Why? Because if we don't have enough food, they weren't able to sell it. See, the prices, no one was buying it. Okay, they weren't able to sell it. So they got rid of some of it, and then the prices for what was left went up. Well, that's what they wanted. They wanted to be able to sell what they had, okay, and make a profit. So some were able to do that, and the others were paid to destroy it. There was a lot of criticism over this because there were people starving, and they were destroying food to raise the price, and it was the government's idea. So that's a little iffy, right? But I can understand what it's doing for the economy. But at the same time, could you figure out a way so that you're not destroying food? No, kind of hard one, isn't it? Okay, TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. They built and ran dams to supply electricity to more people. So there were a lot of people, especially in rural areas, that still did not have electricity. So this was a lot of the rural areas, Kentucky, Tennessee, um, that was being supplied with electricity. Now think about that. This is also creating a job because now we have to have people to run those electricity lines. So now we're able to hire more people. Okay? Everything that they're doing is trying to create jobs, create jobs, create jobs, create jobs. But at the same time, if the government is the one creating the jobs, then the government is the one paying. And how does the government get their money? From the people or stacking up a bunch of debt. So you always have to look and say, this is good, this is good, this gave jobs. But can we look ahead? Can we be smart enough? Can we be wise enough to try to look down the road and see, wait a minute, what's this going to do for my children or my grandchildren? Instead of just thinking about right now. Okay, another one was called the WPA, Works Progress Administration, and this was another one that created jobs for skilled and unskilled workers. This one is cool because it took the artists, it took the ones that painted and drew, and it sent them to towns and they created murals on building walls, and it just gave them jobs creating art in public, and it was encouraging to the people. It took movie makers and it said, okay, I want you to create a movie about the Depression and I want you to film these people and then I want you to kind of promote what we're doing and how we're trying to help people. It took writers and it said, okay, we want you to write about people's life stories. And it used these artistic people to promote what the government was doing. This picture right here is a WPA program where you had these artists drawing posters for the national parks. A lot of the posters that you see advertising the national parks are from the 30s because it was putting these artists to work and promoting national resources. This is another one from WPA, free classes, trade, and technical. All of this was from the Works Progress Administration. Another thing he did right after he comes into office, this is 1933, is he repeals prohibition. Remember, prohibition means no selling of alcohol. He says, let them buy a beer. He wants to encourage the spirits of the people. They're discouraged, they're sad, then let them be encouraged by being able to drink if they want to. Okay. Then think about this too. Does this create jobs? If prohibition is lifted, then these people that were working, making alcohol and selling it, can now go back to work and have a job. This also will cut down on crime because it cuts down on the underworld that we've seen a little bit and talked a little bit about, that people are still getting it, but it's illegal, and then you create all this crime, especially in the bigger cities like Chicago. Okay, so the president coming in and passing all these boom, 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 passing all these things. Guess what? The Supreme Court, remember, we have three parts of the government: the executive branch, which is the president, the judicial, which is the Supreme Court that tries to watch and see if the government is doing what it legally should do. And then you have Congress, who passes the laws, okay? So there is only so much that a president should be able to do on executive order. The rest should have to go through Congress and be passed by Congress. And then the Supreme Court looks and says, now, wait a minute. The Supreme Court stops you when it sees a president that's doing something that's illegal and says, wait a minute. Or sees Congress members that are doing things illegal. It's a system called checks and balances. Instead of just having one person come in and be in charge and taking over and taking us down a way we don't want to go, we have all these different branches that can check and make sure that it's going the way that we agreed it should go. So the Supreme Court is watching and steps in and says, wait a minute. You are overstepping your boundaries as president. You are taking too much power that was not given to you in the Constitution. Okay, so when they start kind of challenging him, Roosevelt says, wait a minute, we have a whole bunch of Supreme Court justices that are over 70 years old. Okay, now the Supreme Court, remember, if you're appointed by a president, okay, so Coolidge comes in and he appoints you as president, and you are in that position till you die. You're not reelected. The next president doesn't have to approve you. That's why it's really important who to vote for as president. Why? Because they bring in the Supreme Court justices, and the Supreme Court decides what is legal and what is not. And we want people who believe the same way we do. So if we have a conservative view, a Christian conservative view, then you want a president who is going to put justices on the court that have that same view as that you agree with. Okay? If you vote for another president and you're like, well, you like what he does here, but you don't like what he does here, but who's he going to put on the Supreme Court? Those people are going to be there till they die. Okay? So you want the Supreme Court packed with people who are going to have your rights in mind. So he starts thinking, well, wait a minute. We have all these old Supreme Court justices. What if I just remove the justices that are over 70 years old? And then he was going to be able to, what we call, pack the court, meaning put all these people on that would agree with him. Now, that is not legal. And people started to get, wait a minute, Roosevelt, what are you doing? It started to scare people because they realized, wait a minute, he is taking too much power. So he never did that. He backed off and didn't do that. But what it did with him coming out and saying that was it made the justices kind of get put in their places. Some of the justices started just saying, okay, and they kind of dropped it, because they were scared of what he was going to try to do. So they kind of dropped the whole issue. So they still allowed they didn't end a lot of the programs that he had started. And the people were so in favor of all of these programs because they were in favor of things getting going, and that it would anger the people. Now, all of these things are being passed through Congress. But we have a very heavy Democratic Congress at the time. So everything he sends to Congress, they pass because they have the majority of votes. They can't be voted down. So see, it passes, and all these things are just passing. But in the meantime, you do have people who are looking at it. Hoover was very vocal about how the danger that he saw that this was putting the country in. And there were other people at the time speaking out. But a lot of people were just glad things were happening. Now, as you get into further in the 1930s, the Depression is still going on. You get in 1938, there's still Depression. And people are starting to worry that they're further in Depression than they were at the beginning. And people are starting to speak out and say, well, maybe these programs aren't helping us. Maybe they're putting us further in depression. But then something happens that helps our economy. It's not a good thing, but it helps our economy. So during the 1930s, Germany, Italy, and Japan are beginning to exert more power. Okay, they're starting to take over. We know that Hitler is coming to power. We saw that when we read Friedrich's story in Echo. And all of these countries are individually taking over and getting more and more and more power. Well, the United States sees this and sees some problems, but we declare to be isolationist and we are going to stay out of it. We're not going to be in this. That's your own deal, and we're going to stay out of war. However, when the war starts, Germany invaded Poland, and that started World War II. We instantly declared to be neutral, but because we have to stay out of the war. But we pretty much make it clear that we are supporting the Allies. And the president immediately puts the country in making supplies and goods to send over to help the Allies. We start making planes. We start making ammunition. We start preparing food. We start doing all kinds of things to send to help. So guess what that does? Now all of a sudden we have a war to prepare for, and now we have money. Now everyone can have a job because we're preparing for war. But this is still taking government money. It takes government money to be in war, and a lot of it. But it's helping the individual people out because now anybody can go to a factory that's building ammunitions and get a job. Anyone can go and work on a plane. Anyone can go and, we're creating factories by the hundreds. Okay, so by 1940, we were making more and more and more and more supplies to support the Allied effort. But it put Americans back to work and created more jobs than the New Deal did. Okay, so way more. So you could argue, so what if we didn't have all these New Deal programs and then the war started anyway, and all those people had a job then because of what we were preparing for war? Would it have been better to have waited? Would it have gotten too bad? We don't know. History is full of what ifs because it's about people making decisions. Some decisions are going to be good, some are not going to be good, and it's going to be full of what ifs. And that's kind of the cool part of examining history. But that's why we examine history, so that we can go forward and have better thoughts of what we should do now so that the future we study history so that the future can be better. Okay? I want you to give me some thoughts on maybe that opinion. What are some things that we could study that would help us to know how to better act now? Maybe some lessons we have learned in the past from what we've learned. Okay? Try to give me something along that line today. Think back at all of the things that we've learned from the beginning. What's a lesson that we've learned as a country that you hope that we continue to remember? Okay? Or give me something that you would like to know more about, or a question that came up during this lesson. There's a lot here. And this leads us right into World War II, and we're going to continue talking. We're going to start talking about World War II tomorrow. So if you have any questions leading in about the Depression or any of those, then put that on this video, or your opinion about something that we've learned in history that you don't want us to forget.